Keshi kotantawan an adeaye. Hojana sabawi kati letshina. Homano diwe dakia kodean yadokia ko awan chatle. Hello, how are your days? My name is Janessa Bawikati. My clans are Frog and Child of Sun. This is the Conversations with Relatives podcast, a Zuni podcast project created out of the Native American Studies Graduate Program's Project of Excellence at the University of New Mexico. Alakwa, thank you for listening. This is the first recording for the Conversations with Relatives podcast, and we are going to be discussing healing and art with Miss Venetia Niha and Miss Talia Nadachu.
Thank you so much, Janessa. Really excited to speak with you and Venetia. My name is Talia Nadachu Iracho. Hotakia Kotea Yatokia Koawan Chatle. I am kind of coming into this conversation, I guess holding different identities, like as a mother, as, a daughter, as a community member. Very blessed to also be a part of the Zuni Youth Enrichment Project. It's had a major role in my life growing up. And then getting to, contribute as, a staff member and an adult. So I think as much as, all these different intersectionalities of our identities kind of come into play when we get these kind of spaces. So Janessa, I do really appreciate you creating something like this because we don't get this a lot. So yeah, I'm excited. Thank you.
So I'm Venetia Niha, Govinchi Kwede and Gagali Kwe Alan Charlotte. And I'm coming from this, seeing it in a position as both a community member, but also within a higher education perspective within my current position with American Indian Student Services at the University of New Mexico. So I feel like everything that I was reflecting on while working on this was just within that perspective, but also my experience living in Zuni for basically half my life.
Right, yes. Thank you so much for sharing, ladies, and for taking the time to be in this conversation. As mentioned, we're first discussing healing, and we read, the chapter from Michelle Jacobs' Yakima Rising, Indigenous Cultural Revitalization, Activism and Healing. And the chapter was The Renaissance is Now, Next Steps for Healing and Social Change. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I think I kind of wanted to start off the conversation with just this first question was, how do you define healing? And I think it's a really big question because, there's so many different things that I think we can be healing from. But I think in general, I kind of wanted to see what we could all either come up together or as individuals, what healing means.
Yeah, I think an understanding of the concept even takes its own process. It sounds like a really powerful word, and it's like a goal. I used to think of it as a finish line, back in the day as I started to grow up, especially as I was going through, higher education and being away from home. You start to have that space and ability to start, I guess, processing things and realize oh, I do have things to heal from. And then you think it's this solution and everything, and you can get really frustrated. It can be really powerful. It can be, revitalizing, all of these great things, but it's also really ugly, and you have to sit through it and you go through those hardships. And I think even now, I still am discovering what healing really means, but I've been able to, I guess, accept that it's actually the ability to learn how to cope rather than a solution to past traumas or hurts. When you think you heal, if you get a cut or something, it's cool, my skin came back together and I can keep on going. I'm sure there's that scar, but I think with just the different various I guess types of traumas or pains or things that we've all gone through, Sometimes we're gonna bump that cut and it's gonna reopen, or sometimes it could get infected, or just like the different things. And then it's like, actually, how are you responding to it then? So I know that when I used to have triggers around certain things, my coping mechanisms were not super healthy, or my responses were not, productive, or towards, the goal of healing. And as I've gotten older and have different experiences, I'm not fully healed from those things. I still get triggered, but I'm like, oh, whoa, look at it. Like, good job, Talia. Now you're not, running away or blowing up or doing something. I can now recognize when I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going through it. I better do something that I know is going to help me get through it. So, yeah, long answer to, I think healing is just learning healthy ways of coping, because we can never get to that definite finish line of being like, I'm all good.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think that's an important thing to recognize as like as humans and in our different life situations and the different problems that we face as individuals and as a community. Like, we can't always, be within that safe space. You're never fully, you know, so to speak, out of a danger zone. But Venetia, did you have any other words or any other feelings that you think relate to, defining healing?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with like what Talia said. But I view like for me, I view healing more on like a emotional, spiritual, and cultural level. Like yes, healing can be like physical, such as like, oh, I got a cut from falling off of my bike, and it gives me like a few weeks just to process that healing. But at the same time, like you also got to consider your internal healing, because I feel like a lot of people, especially like indigenous peoples, consider this an afterthought, and they just put their physical healing first rather than their emotional and spiritual healing, just because we're always in this thought process of like, oh, if I feel physically okay, that means I'm okay on the inside. But they don't realize that the emotions just continue to like build up and up and up. So I definitely view like healing, taking it emotionally, in terms of restoring our sense of self, developing resilience and perseverance, but at the same time connecting with our authentic self, just because it gives us a new perspective in life and just gives us that inner peace I feel like a lot of us really need. But like on a cultural and spiritual level, just like the article mentioned, it's about like cultural revitalization and just finding strategic and effective ways to restore and strengthen our Zuni identities, traditions, and values. So, cultural healing is just important because it helps us keep us grounded and reminds us that there's a greater purpose to life, especially as Shiwi people.
Yeah, thank you. That was really, powerful in what you're saying, that how, as a community, we have to pay attention to those different levels that we need healing at, not just physical levels, not just, mental levels, but, in a spiritual sense too. And I think that's what's really powerful about Michelle Jacob and their book, Yakima Rising, because it really focuses on those grassroots level of healing. For example, I think one of the chapters spoke about not necessarily saying that starting an initiative, but not necessarily saying like this is the problem that we're working on, but really just starting that initiative as a way of giving the people something to do together, and that is based and grounded within their culture. So one of the things that they did was, working with salmon, processing it through in a traditional way, with their smokehouses, and, surrounded by all their relatives, and working together in a way that I think we don't always get the opportunity to do with, school and work. Those types of things are viewed as a priority in terms of, where to spend our time. And so I think it's really interesting that there's so many different ways that we could heal, as an individual, as a community, and even as families. But this next question is, what is it that our Zuni community needs healing from? Because it can all be very different, or it can be similar. And I think that speaks a lot about what we're going through, either, as individuals or together. I think one thing that our Zuni community needs healing from is of course related to violence, and specifically violence towards our women. And I think that's a really challenging thing that our community has been faced with, and some of our programs, our tribal programs, have been working towards in helping. I don't think we can necessarily say that we can solve that issue, but I think it would mean a lot to bring those numbers or incidents of violence down. Would be incredible for individual women and their families.
For me, since I was born in Zuni and raised in Zuni until I had to go to college after graduating high school, the first thing that popped into my head was bullying that occurs within our community, no matter if it's a child, all the way to whether it be our hotas, nanas, or wowas. For me, it's really astounding to see and hear what our people say about each other. And I feel like in this day and age, it's something that keeps getting worse and worse as time goes on. And instead of building each other up and providing that support and advice that we're so in need of, we're always tearing each other down and apart. And I think for me, just like from observances that I like took in when I would go back home, I feel like that bullying has transitioned into a traditional setting, which is something that I really find surprising because, like, we're not supposed to be like acting this way within these settings. Especially if it's like during events where social dances take place, where I've heard like people, especially like ladies, making fun of how other ladies dance or how they're dressed and whatnot. And I'm like, why are you always like tearing each other down instead of saying like, oh, here, let me help you fix your dress, your manta, or your belt. Um, so, and then also like many complain on like why younger generations are hesitant to learn our Zuni ways, but they don't realize that it stems from how we treat each other and how our children are seeing us interact with one another in different settings around the community. And for me, I just don't think we realize and accept that many of our children begin bullying each other's because they see like their family members doing it and think that that behavior is okay. And I don't know, I just feel like bullying is something that we're definitely in need of. But I feel like with this day and age, it's definitely it's going to be a process to get to the point where we're not treating each other the way we are today.
Right, and I thank you for bringing that up because it's such a big issue, and I think it really, like what you're saying, has a really deep connection in that, like, our youth don't feel comfortable or feel motivated to dive into traditions or traditional settings because there is that thought that, oh, I might be made fun of by my family, or I might be made fun of by others in the community. And it's so much easier to just say no, no thank you, or like, no, I don't want to dance, or no, I don't want to dress up, or no, I don't want to try speaking Zuni. So I think it does go hand in hand. And I think that's a real big social issue. And it's really interesting to consider how could we even begin to start quote unquote solving that issue. But the first thing that comes to my mind is just really returning to our values as Zuni people. I think one of those is respecting one another, and comes in hand when we're considering that teasing and humor is a part of our culture. It's a part of the way that we've grown up and the way that we interact with one another. But there certainly is a line, and I think respect is where we can start determining where that line is. And I think this can also be like something that each individual can take on as maybe like a challenge or way of living, is is trying to be more respectful and trying to be more mindful of how we're treating each other, especially when it starts becoming, offensive or hurtful to one another, the things that we say or the way that we act.
I completely agree with Janessa, your comment about needing to heal from violence. And Tanisha, you've brought up something that we see year after year after year in different surveys, and it's just the data results from kids in our own school district. We have about 7 years worth of data from kids in the Zuni Public School District who continue to identify bullying as one of the top 3 issues that they're dealing with. And it stems from everything. If we're talking about like what it was our community needing to heal from, that bullying is coming from those wounds, that we're bullying each other because we're hurting, and we can't cope from the bullying because we're hurting, and it unfortunately goes all the way back to like, initial colonization and initial, introduction of Western concepts. And though our people are resilient, and we're still here today, like as beautiful as ever, everyone knows that, we're going through things like the violence and like the bullying, but also like alcoholism and drug use and poverty and all of these different systems, and like health disparities that are, and they are systematic. They have all been kind of been constructed, and we've been, unfortunately given the short end of the stick of it all. However, we need to get out of the rut of kind of the woe is me. It sucks. We can acknowledge like the hurts, and that's where the healing has to happen, but also what are we gonna do about it, and so yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to do like a mapping of like what is it that people need to heal from, and it'll start surface level, but I'm pretty sure as time went on and we had harder conversations, or we just kept asking why, or from what, we would end up finding like deep rooted causes of where pain's coming from.
Yeah, and I think that would be an interesting approach. And the only thing that like concerns me is like, are people, actually going to respond to that? Are they actually going to want to? And it would take like a great amount of, our community coming together and actually saying like, yes, we want to pay attention to more about what we're going through, and we actually want to be proactive in solving or dealing with that. But I'm not sure, when would our community feel that they are at a level to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I think like certain folks in the community are ready. I think some folks are still in denial. Some folks, so I think everyone's levels of readiness would be varying quite a bit. And I will say there's quite a number of tribal programs and different initiatives that do happen where they're hosting some sort of health conversation or some sort of event related to things similar like this. And unfortunately, people don't show up, people don't show up, but people are asking for it. And I think, like you said earlier about like, taking the time, we're so enveloped in our work and in our school and in the day-to-day, like the quick, pace of what we have to do to, I guess, like survive, that these things could take, a backseat. And going to an event after work, or to like touch on a concept or a topic that is like, oh man, that's gonna take some time. Like, it's hard. And then the other part that really concerns me, and that we've experienced with some of the youth we work with, is once we open those doors, what resources do we have available to help catch them? So once somebody is able to open up and, work through their trauma, it's not like okay, cool, see you tomorrow. That messes you up, and it takes you a couple days to, recenter yourself. Or sometimes, like, unfortunately, it gets really bad, and you need professional help. And I know that our our community just does not have enough behavioral health professionals to support the need here.
Yeah, just adding on to that, I feel like it's really up to community members to take this approach of how do we heal as a community with open-mindedness, and just realizing that with including in like presentations on like substance abuse or bullying or domestic violence, you have to come with it and like taking this approach with an open mind rather than saying like, oh well, I already know this and that, but they don't realize like there's a lot of new data that's coming, that's like being brought up now, and new strategies that could improve these specific areas that we need healing from. Instead of being stubborn and being like, oh well, I'll just deal with this on my own, they need to really take it with an open-mindedness approach, because they don't really realize that the information that may be shared during these specific presentations could really be useful for them. And that goes back to like the the outcomes that currently happen with events going on back home. Like substance abuse presentation may not have really high presentation numbers. I feel like that's just because majority of our community may not be ready to like take that step to be open-minded and to learn new strategies to cope with their substance abuse. But at the same time, I feel like I wouldn't want to say like trying to like bring them in, but possibly creating an incentive for participants to actually come into these presentations and like panels, because I feel like right now there might not be an incentive tied to it. And I feel like adding in that specific incentive could bring in like more participation numbers for these specific types of events. I wouldn't say like, I'm not trying to say like using incentives as a way to bring it in, but I feel like this is something that could increase that attendance, especially with events like this.
Right, yeah, and I think your point reminds me that, there's so many different ways of learning, and I think that's something that might be the challenge with, trying to get more attendees for these events, is maybe that strategy has been used so much and so repetitively for different issues that it just kind of doesn't seem as effective anymore. So thinking about the different approaches or technologies that could be used could be really important for different programs or people who are specifically focusing on certain issues or topics, like substance abuse. Would it be worth it if a program tried, creating some type of like app that they could use to access, different resources about, different conditions or different types of coping mechanisms or different resources, outside of the community that they could turn to? I think that might be a possibility. And these are things that take, a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of knowledge to, build these different things. So I think one thing that, I'm reminded of within my own education is that building or healing, our tribal communities, they aren't going to happen, within our generation. But, what's important is that we even begin that process, start taking steps towards making those changes or building new things that our, future generations can use, our future leaders, those younger generations, so that they have some type of guidance, have some type of resources to turn to. They will then have the opportunity to either, restructure what was built or even, add on to it. And I think that would be incredibly valuable. And I think that's, building towards sustainability and as a community and as individuals. So Yeah, I think that's, something that comes to mind is just how there's so many approaches that can be taken. And I think it's just really trying it, and it does require people to be open minded. And I think that also means that you have to be critical, not in a way where you're like, that's not going to work. That's not how we do it. Or, this isn't how we do things, not necessarily having that type of attitude, but really just considering if it is possibly causing more harm than being more of a benefit. So thank you for bringing that up. It does require a lot of, reflection, open-mindedness, adaptability to be able to heal or to be able to try new things that would help others heal or, recover whatever it is that they're going through, whether it's, the violence, the bullying, these different systematic issues that we are facing, with healthcare or, our economics. Thank you. Was there anything else that you think that is a major challenge that we need to heal from as a community?
I think one really important part is also just the COVID pandemic, and the ways that we had to pivot or I guess adjust and I don't know, do things in a really fast way, and then coming out of it, there hasn't been any conversations or processing. We experienced a lot of loss at so many different levels. Yeah, I mean, the entire world experienced it, but we all know Zuni is so unique and special that, yeah, there's another layer of healing that we need from the pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. I think, that is a whole big can of worms trying to think of, how fast it happened and how like fast, or it didn't seem fast coming out of it, but looking back you're like, wow, we really went through that. Like we really had to stay in our homes and we had to figure out how to get food and we had to face the trauma of not being able to be with our loved ones if they were in the hospital. That's one thing that I experienced, and I'm sure you all might have, and others experience, is how much trauma that creates, how much that keeps a person from being able to feel like you're able to cope or grieve with those different types of losses. And then, there's also the different impacts that it had on, the Zuni organization, the different ways that, funds were directed, programs that possibly closed or might have lost, personnel. There's so many different things that happened because of COVID. And yeah, I think that itself is a whole nother, episode or conversation to have. I wanted to, I guess we can go ahead and go into the next question, which is, can we heal as a community simply by having discussions? So, and who do you think should be a part of those discussions? Like, are there any key individuals or leaders that would need to be a part of those conversations to make it a progressive conversation?
I think short answer, like, yes. I think that there can be a lot of healing just from having conversations and discussions with one another. I think they would have to be strategically facilitated, even at like different levels of, I guess, I don't know. I don't know if you all have experienced like a whole community like meeting how those go.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should do that. And I think that if it was like cool, like almost like focus groups with specific identities, or kind of like, hey, if you feel like this fits you and who you are, like, oh, we've got an introverted talking circle here. We've got like an artist talking circle here, and we've got it's just the different levels of like personalities, communication style, but then also the fields that they're in and the identities that they hold. And then just a really really good facilitator. I think
Right.
one would just make sure that it's a healthy experience, and then two, I think almost everyone coming in with the understanding that vulnerability would be the key in all of this being, successful. We have to put our stuff aside, our egos aside, our images aside, whatever it be, and just come into the space vulnerable and be able to talk and, know that we're not going to be judged, or that no one has like this hidden agenda, and it's like, let's just get it out there. But that's a lot to ask too. It's hard. It's scary. Vulnerability. Being vulnerable is really hard.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that requires a lot of understanding and appreciation, by the listeners, is to be able to to understand just how incredible it is for a person to be vulnerable within your presence, to be able to share something that could be deeply impacting them, hurting them, or challenging them, and opening themselves in a way that would expose them to potential harm. I think that's something that definitely we need to be present in order to have more open conversations with another. But I think another thing is that we can have these conversations even at smaller levels, between siblings, between spouse, between family members, between friends. There can be levels to where these conversations can be at, but it would certainly be interesting to see it at a larger level. Talia, I think I can definitely think on how community conversations have been had, but at the same time, those were in incredibly political settings. So, it'd be interesting to see how if those conversations are similar outside of that context. So, Venetia, what do you think?
Yeah, so I definitely take this from like a community approach. Like, yes, discussion can happen to be used as part of our healing to a certain extent. And I feel like discussion, and I really liked how Talia said, like, we can have like focus groups with like a smaller set of community members to try to get the message out there with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like with this, discussions can occur with local prevention specialists, health professionals, support group, or even rehab representatives, as well as for me, I feel like religious and tribal leaders can also sit in on these conversations as well to provide that cultural aspect with conversations related to healing. The reason why I say that discussion can occur to a certain extent is because of how stubborn or refusing to be open minded a lot of our community members can be, especially when it comes to topics regarding mental health or bullying. And I feel like conversations with these two specific topics can occur with a mental health advocate, therapist, and even victims for like bullying victims, just to give like different perspectives while having this conversation. But it's ultimately up to like community members to change their behavior and to be open minded to learning how to work on their mental health, for example. And for me, there's only like so many discussions one can have on bullying, for an example, and its impacts. But it's really up to the individuals partaking in these behaviors to go on a path of self reflection to realize the damage that they're causing to others. And again, many can be a bit too like close minded to understand that what they say or do to others can be a form of bullying, and it's hopes with discussions like this through focus groups or visioning sessions for them to realize, like, oh, this behavior is basically bullying others. But at the same time, it comes with taking this approach with an open mind and just willing to learn these new strategies.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, ladies, so much. I think I'm just gonna ask one more question, within this subject, so that way we can discussing about art. So this last question is, and it relates to the article or the chapter that we read. How has the chapter impacted the way you consider healing to be done at a community level?
Yeah, no. I guess I can answer this one. This one I took more so with the approach that I'm currently in
Mm-hmm.
as an employee at UNM. So I've always thought of community healing to be through culture, but also like through modern day health practices as well. But after reading this specific article, it definitely brought a new perspective of what community healing can be. And one thing that stood out to me the most was the part where it mentions Indigenous scholars using scholarship or their education to serve their community specifically. For me, I feel like there's a good amount of Zunis who are either currently or planning to pursue higher education in hopes to bring back what we learned back home. And I really liked how the individual named, I believe his name's Devin, says that we're ultimately ensuring our tribe's survival. So, relating this back to my undergraduate degree, so I graduated with my BS in exercise science with a minor in community health education. And during that time, my goal during undergrad was to improve my knowledge on health disparities that our community faces. So this is like diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, and how exercise ultimately impacts these health disparities. And growing up, the reason why I wanted to pursue this specific program was just because growing up, I always saw like my nanas and my family members coming back from the hospital with like band-aids on their arms and me not fully realizing that they're going through dialysis. And I guess that like furthered my curiosity to see how like we can like how I can contribute to navigating these health disparities that currently exist back home. And so I took these experiences and pursued my degree in hopes to learn and bring back what I learned to the community. And because so many of our community members live with these health conditions, they may not know how to live a healthy lifestyle or even know like how exercise and nutrition impact them. And so pursuing this degree definitely furthered my understanding. And I feel like at this point, I'm able to provide like the importance of exercise for those living a sedentary or like moderate lifestyle, but also like telling my bobos and my nanas how like exercising for even 30 minutes a day can be beneficial to their health. And so, yeah, that's basically why I wanted to pursue a higher education with aspirations to return back to the community and learn what I learned. Just because relating back to the reading, it ensures that our community survives in the long run. And this is how I comprehend like this specific question is like how tribal members who pursue higher education contribute to community level healing. So this is basically us like pursuing higher education as our way to gain knowledge and skill sets to contribute to the healing process for Zuni, whether it be like health focused, education related, or even just social sciences related. We're all contributing to healing one way or another. But I feel like for me, what's really holding some of us back that are currently pursuing a higher education is just that career barrier that currently exists at home. So many of us want to return back to our community to pass down the knowledge that we've learned and worked so hard for. But at the same time, when we do go back home and we apply for all these jobs, at the end, we're told that we're overqualified. And that in turn leads us to finding jobs outside of our community and just feeling like we're not contributing to the healing process back home. And so I feel like it does prevent, like, those of us pursuing higher education, it prevents us from contributing to the healing process.
Yeah, I like that you pointed out that there are some barriers for students, returning with that important knowledge. And I think that's kind of what this chapter and even the book itself really emphasizes is that you can take these initiatives outside of an organization. And I think that just really depends on a person's, willingness, their willingness to be uncomfortable, their willingness to struggle, and those are very difficult things. And I think that's why we don't have a lot or too many of those, grassroots level initiatives, things that are coming from the people, us ourselves, in trying to, build something, or trying to, help some type of problem. Or it's really difficult, but I think it can be done. And I think we just need to collectively find ways to support each other if we ever find ourselves, trying to start things like that. We need to be able to pull ourselves up, like to be able to, feel like a community where we can support one another, where we can feel empowered enough to help each other. And I think it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to be difficult, but I think there's a lot of value in doing that. That's a really important perspective, coming from this chapter and from you, Venetia. I think you have a lot of knowledge that will definitely benefit our community in the future when you return. So I'm looking forward to seeing, how that happens. And of course, you, Talia, you're already, within the community doing these different things, and especially through ZYEP. So I think, with more people like you guys, we can continue to work towards healing our community in ways that mean a lot to, our current generations and our future generations. So thank you guys for, discussing this, topic of healing. I wanted to just pose, to listeners, to the audience. The group was able to kind of have these healing journaling prompts and able to answer them, within their own time and space. So I just wanted to share them, and in the event that you, the listener, the audience, wanted to take the time to answer them, feel free to share them, with your family, your friends, with your colleagues, your responses and the questions themselves. So the first question was, what ways of healing did you and your family utilize when you were a child? The second question is, what ways of healing do you utilize now? So the approach for these questions and the other journaling prompts was what's called a life's course approach. And that means considering, a topic, an issue, or really anything from the initial point of life, like beginning in childhood, and moving forward to where it stands now, in your current time and age. All right, well, we are moving on into the conversation of art. And, art is a big thing, within our Zuni community, as it is for many other indigenous nations, cultures. So, for this subject, I wanted to, hear perspectives about some written works about art within our community. So one of them is an article from the Ashuiawa Messenger. So it's issue 31, which is from 2023. And, all of these issues are available and accessible through the Zuni Tribal Organization website. So this one the article is titled ZYEP Art Apprentice Sell and Show Original Work at March Art Showcase. And then the second article is from the Shui Messenger, which is the older version of the Ashuiawa Messenger. So it's from 1986, and it's the article is Zuni Rock Art by S. Amasoli. And so the first question is, how does art heal? And, how does art heal our community? How does art heal, yourself? Or how does art heal a family? So, I think, Talia, you have an idea of how this specifically art impacts the community and youth in a more direct way, in terms of healing and, development, growth as individuals.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to see that article as part of the readings. I love the artist apprenticeship that ZYEP does. It's incredible, and it's been years and years of coordination since ZYEP's inception. Artists have been a part of the conversation because, like you mentioned, Janessa, it's such an important pillar in our community. I think it's like what 70 or 75% of our community is a self-employed artist, which is like just like I don't you think about that, and there's one artist in almost every household. So this is everyday conversation. This is like you ask any kid and it's like, yeah, there's an artist in my home, you know. But it's just embedded in our life that sometimes we don't really I guess we don't realize how special it is. And I know that I was brought up on an artist income. You know, my dad is a jewelry maker, and I remember he would use what he would make to buy the glove I wanted when I joined baseball, and you know, when it was back to school time, like I got shoes, you know. So like you start to see the ways that art is embedded in not only like our economic development, but the continuation of our traditions and cultural knowledge, because those are resources too. There's a lot of things that we can't use modern technology to document, you know. So I know for a fact, like, you know, I have two sons, and when Bryce started participating and like dancing and things like that, I was referring to different paintings and things to see like the dress of ways that our traditional regalia is supposed to go, like, oh wait, which side, which arm is that supposed to go on, you know, things like that. And so they're educational resources, but then it's also no, I was just talking about how art has just multiple uses in our community as, you know, an economic tool, a cultural education tool, like even the ability to connect, because in our apprenticeship program at ZYEP, we take different artists in the community and they become the instructor, and then we have cohorts of about 10 to 12 youth who want to learn that art form. And then for 10 weeks they're connected, like they're learning from that instructor. The instructor is passing on like really, like, honestly sacred knowledge, because it's like weaving, it's painting, it's been pottery, it's been cooking, you know. And you see just that transfer of knowledge, but then also the pride that comes in it of like, this is unique to Zuni, or these are what our symbols mean, and this is like how you do it, and you do it with good intention and a good heart, so that what you're creating is, you know, beautiful, and like you're bringing that into the world. And then you give them the skills and the tools and the ability to then, you know, become advocates for themselves and for their community, because then they go to these art shows, and for some people they may never have an interaction with a Zuni person, but it's that artist, you know. And that's kind of the impression that they get at the community, and they get to, our youth artists get to speak like, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what this means. And one, being really prideful of that, and having that responsibility, but then also being like, cool, I can make, you know, a living off of doing this as well to support myself and my family. So it's been a really powerful experience. Like, I am no artist, like, heck no, I am not, but yes, I am healing off of those coloring sheets for sure. You know, it's so soothing. Somebody draw my lines and I'll color it. But the just the power that it has to heal is incredible, and I've seen it firsthand, and have experienced it. And then to see, you know, this apprenticeship program and the other forms of impact is, yeah, I sometimes don't even have words for it, and I'm just so appreciative to everyone that's made it happen.
Yeah, from what it sounds like, there's a lot of healing or creation of different bonds, you know, between people, between different artists. Yeah, it's very interesting to think about, you know, these relationships happening and how they could be healing or building within this space that you guys are creating. Is that program continuing? I'm sorry, I haven't read anything recent about that program.
Yeah, we are super fortunate to, you know, continue offering it. We have funding to offer it for another 2 years. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm excited for that to keep happening, and I hope it can keep reading about it, because it certainly, when I did read this article, I was like, wow, that's really powerful stuff, really empowering for the youth, for the artists, for the community. And like the article speaks about, is it's teaching them what it's like to be, a show artist. That's something that's important, like you say, because a lot of our people do end up becoming or continuing the tradition of being a self-employed artist. That's of course important to our economy as for Zuni. And then also, when you think about it, the state, because I think, the state of New Mexico depends a lot on, tourism, and relies on indigenous cultures and art to bring in some funds, to bring in people. Venetia, what do you think? How does art heal, or what are your experiences with art?
Yeah, so as an artist, it definitely took me a while to actually say that I'm an artist, just because, I don't know, just like that imposter syndrome and feeling like what I was creating wasn't at an artist level for me. So it definitely took me a while to say that I'm an artist, but for me, art does heal on an emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of artists use it as a form of stress relief. Um, and then there's like that emotional expression and release component through, because we're expressing our feelings through the art that we're creating. And I feel like art does empower us with whatever we create. But in terms of using art as a healing tool and relating this back to like ZYEP, specifically with like my camp counselor experiences like years ago, I feel like art was definitely seen as a healing tool specifically for like our youth, just
Mm-hmm.
because in the mornings when our campers would come in, you would notice that some of them were feeling down, just because they may not have wanted to come to camp that day, or if there's like stuff going on back home, they kind of like brought those feelings into camp that specific morning. But when we had like our art sessions, like our pottery making, print making, or even our painting sessions, you immediately saw the campers like overall emotional well-being just go the opposite direction. Just because I felt like they were putting the feelings that they were feeling that morning into whatever they were creating, and specifically using the pottery making sessions as an example, where the instructor was telling us like the significance of the pottery and the designs that we were using to create those paintings, while we were painting the pottery. I feel like the campers took a lot of that information in, and realizing like, oh, I have to feel like my emotions have to be like in a positive way in order for our pottery to come out the way that we want it to come out, along with our designs. And I don't know, I just feel like those specific art sessions with ZYEP, specifically during summer camp, was an opportunity for our youth to heal in a way, especially with things going on back home. And yeah.
I feel like your response, Venetia, kind of answered the second question, which was, how can art be used as a tool in healing? Do either of you have any other ideas on how that question can be answered?
Yeah. So I guess just adding on to what I just said, I feel like there's that cultural healing aspect as well. And I'm so like thankful that ZYEP incorporates our traditional Zuni art into the art apprenticeship program, but also during the summer camp sessions as well. Just because it leads to the efforts to pass down our art teachings to the next generations, but also leading the youth to develop a sense of purpose, belonging, and connection to our Zuni culture and traditions, but also being used as a healing tool to have them express themselves emotionally, but also fostering like that collective healing to build resilience within themselves as they continue to grow older.
This next question, I think it's really interesting, because it kind of would make us be critical of art. So it is, how does art impact our community in good and bad ways?
This one's a fun one. We've actually been having this conversation at work because as we We offer 3 cohorts of the apprenticeships a year, and we go back and forth about like, okay, what are we offering for the next cohort? What artists should we be talking to? And you know, it's ranged from really traditional art to more of the contemporary forms. But what we're starting to notice too is what like art, like we just got done talking about, is a tool and can act as like a coping tool and resource and everything, and it's a way of expression, and that's what's important, right? Like we want our kids to be able to use art in healthy ways and express themselves in ways that maybe they're not able to, and that's been awesome. um and then there's that fine line of letting them do what they want to do, but then their interests aren't really in the traditional arts. And there's this sense of urgency of like, ooh, we need to preserve the traditional arts and we need to like teach about the importance of the traditional art. But only a handful of the kids might, be like, oh yeah, I do want to pursue that. While the others are kind of like, no, I'm going to paint what I want to paint and, borrow these techniques from a different culture, or like what I saw on TikTok. And so I don't necessarily want to use the words good and bad, but it's definitely been kind of complex about like, oof, what's the balance of our art here, as we intertwine between the traditional and the contemporary. Because even in like some traditional arts, there's folks using contemporary methods or concepts, and it just starts to, I guess, I don't know. Yeah, the concepts become farther from the original intent, but then that's still such a beautiful thing. Like that's literally our lives. But how do we still hold on to like what is traditional knowledge or sacred? And it's tough because I go back and forth because I don't want it to be a sometimes tradition, as beautiful as it is, can also be kind of harmful. Not all traditions are great. We talk about traditional foods a little while ago, and it's like, oh, that's the leading cause of our diabetes rates here, in the community. While at the same time, it's pretty alarming and terrifying to see the rates that our children are not embracing who we are, and like how our language is endangered. So I think art is almost just another manifestation of those concepts of, the balance between the two.
Right, and I really like how you pointed out how tradition can also be a little bit, of a limitation. I think, from my discussions in, my classes and my education, there's this almost fear that sometimes we depend too much on outlining and trying to adhere to, tradition, when it's starting to make our culture, our lives static. So, and that's completely, opposite of, who we are or should be. Is that our culture, our lives, it should be thriving, it should be lively, it should be building, and it's really up to us to determine in what ways exactly that does happen. And that can be, as you say, like complex, because our community is rather large. Some of the other pueblos are relatively small. For us, with such large numbers, and that means we all have different perspectives, we all have different experiences of even what it is to be a Zuni person. And there are some things that are similar, that stay similar for each and every one of us, but that some of these little minute details or traditions become a little bit altered or unique in our own families and our own homes. And I think that isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I don't think could be considered a bad thing when the essence of the tradition, the value of the tradition, the meaning of the tradition is essentially what grounds or what roots that practice or symbolism. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because I think that's something that, I've had conversations with, my friend about, is just how people get so caught up in wanting to be, quote unquote traditional, that it kind of either prevents people from, joining in and being accepted as traditional, or not having the resources to do that, to be considered doing things in a traditional way. So, but when I was thinking of these different questions to ask, I wanted to ask this one specifically because, with the way that art is for our community, it's such a big part of who we are, how we make our living. And I just wanted to think, like, is there any way that this negatively impacts, our people, our community, our families? For me, I think I could think of how when I was young, I just remember my late grandmother, my hota. She was a jewelry maker, and throughout the day she would be at her machine, and she would just be working the whole entire day. And while my cousin and I would be outside playing and running around and coming in and eating. And that's really how she spent her day. And though it's like really valuable, the type of art that she produced, the jewelry that she produced, was in a traditional way, and how that also provided for the family. But I think of how just as valuable it would have been to be able to spend a day with her, without her having to work hard and being possibly in an uncomfortable position for hours trying to finish a piece of work. And without the pressure of I have to finish this in order to meet this deadline, to be able to sell, to be able to get groceries, whatever, pay this bill, whatever it may be. So that's kind of like how I was thinking of this question. Do either of you have anything else that might have come up about like how art might be not necessarily bad, but like negative, or could be challenging?
Yeah, so I feel like the way that I thought of this question might be a bit controversial for others, just depending on how they take it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I put down that like there's that financial aspect of Zuni artists who actually have the opportunity to sell, their artwork to support their families. But at the same time, with selling the artwork and getting like their artwork out there outside of the Zuni community, there are risks that come with it. Like there may be other artists who may not be Zuni or even native who might even copy their artwork
Mm-hmm.
and sell it for way cheaper than what it was originally sold for, or it might end up on like Temu or Amazon or like those websites. And so that's like one of the risks to being an artist and having an impact in our community in a negative light. The next one was more so like with tourism, with artists, they're getting their names out there, and it starts to attract a lot of outsiders to come into our community to explore the village and getting to know more about the other artists and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like tourists do come visit us during like our coco dances, and I feel like that's one of the greatest risks that negatively like impact our community. I understand that we're open and welcoming to anyone that comes to Zuni, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like for me, they shouldn't be observing like the specific dances that we do have, and I'm always thinking of it in like a negative light, thinking like these tourists may be like secretly filming or taking photos of our cocos without like, the tour guides noticing. And, in this day and age, there are technology that exists out there to where like they're setting cameras to just like glasses to where they might actually be wearing that at the dehwita and like no one would even notice that that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, there's always that possibility that, the tourists who come in and might be like secretly filming and taking pictures, and we might end up seeing like those specific media on Facebook or YouTube or even Google. And like again, I understand art leads to like the increased tourism, but there really should be like restrictions established to if like we're wanting to preserve our culture and our traditions, and we don't want non-natives getting to the point where they're actually reenacting like what they saw during their visit. And I feel like that's why I was so shocked. It was like a culture shock when I saw that other pueblos closed off their villages when they had similar dances and like no outsiders were allowed. So I feel like that's, something that Zuni should even consider if we're just wanting to preserve our culture and traditions, even if it may impact the tourism attraction just a bit. But, we just gotta think of it in that specific perspective. So that was like my thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's like definitely some way to work around it if like people are concerned about not selling as much during times where we do have those dances, is just maybe creating more opportunities or participating in those opportunities that exist to sell, like the Zuni Main Street Festival is becoming fairly big. I think it's almost like a Zuni Fair Junior in a way, so it's kind of like another opportunity for artists to sell. And then, unfortunately, we weren't able to have the Zuni Fair this past year, but then, ZYEP was able to do the Fun Fall Festival, so I think that was a good opportunity. Yeah, I think there's definitely some ways to work around it, and I appreciate you for, sharing your perspective, Venetia, because certainly it is, something that can be controversial, but, it is really important to consider when we have such a valuable, culture and different ceremonies that we need to protect. It is very, interesting and kind of scary to see how, culture, art, tradition, it can be threatened in different ways, how it can be mocked.
This is such a cool conversation, and I think the community would, appreciate it, and especially the people that are living it every day. But I think, like, bottom line, we have to come to like a Zuni owned, Zuni led, like, initiative or like processes and procedures to be able to like, yeah, what is our stance on being able to share our culture, and what are the boundaries, what are the guidelines? Because yeah, there are like aspects that I totally agree on with all of that. I'm always in this weird position of like, yeah, how much do we share? Because nobody knows the magic until they experience it. However, that should just be for us. But, so it goes back and forth. And so I just feel like, especially with the tourism, because it's all connected to, revenue and our cultural preservation, like, I think it'd be really awesome if our community could get to a place where we all decided, this is the way we're going to go, and we're all going to stand together. And like, just I love how you're talking about it. Maybe there's some aspects that are just for us, and then we're creating the other opportunities for inviting people in. And I think there are really good examples in the world that have done that. And yeah, hopefully we're inspired to do that too.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's worth seeking out. What are the community's opinions? How do people feel about this? Because I think it's important to really see in what ways do we agree, and how can we act on those things. But thank you guys for sharing your thoughts on that. I just wanted to kind of turn back to the articles. I just wanted to see if either of you had outstanding thoughts or ideas about the articles that we read, the Zuni rock art, and then the Zuni ZYEP art apprentice show and sell.
I appreciated in um, the art, rock art article, how the author, being as young as they are, like, had this understanding and this concept. It's really cool when you can hear a young person like share their opinion or their perspectives on like values in our community. And it's always really cool because it's like, oh, like they know more than like we're giving credit to them, and Um, yeah, I think it was just like the last section of that article talking about how people who might, you know, disrespect the rock art, like kind of questioning, like, how could you do that? Because these are really significant, and I don't know. It's such a simple concept and a simple point in the article, but it was really cool to know that like those values were still acknowledged and wanting to be upheld. And I think that is the case for a lot of our kids, even though we constantly hear like, oh, our kids don't care, or they're so lost. And but like, yeah, they are, because there's so much coming at them. But if we really gave them the opportunity and space and the power to use their voice, I think that we'd be very surprised at you know what their thoughts are and the values that they are trying to uphold.
Just want to read it, just that last paragraph, because I think it does, like you said, it shows a lot about a youth's perspective. It says, my classmates and I have been to the village of the Great Kiva, and we've seen all the artwork of our ancestors. Some of these works have been defaced and some have been repainted. I feel badly for the people who've gone and defaced the rock art. I encourage all to protect and respect the rock art, which is sacred to our people. And again, this is from 1996. Still, I think I still resonate with that feeling that we need to protect and value these different ancestral arts that exist. And thought this was just a really good article. It is a really like short piece that really spoke to that instance of like art in our past. I think the other article just spoke a lot about like art in our current situation, but yeah, I felt like it was a good kind of like contrast in a way between like art then and art now. Venetia, what did you think about the little article, if you got to read it?
Yeah. So with the Zuni rock art article, I really liked how they said that it symbolizes the history of our ancestors, and that in some ways our ancestors are still with us today through the Zuni rock art. And I feel like the last sentence where they said it's important to us to respect and protect the art because it was our ancestors that created it translates back to what they said at the end of the article. Like, it's all about like respecting the space that surrounds us, because like within the community there's like pottery shards over at DY,
Mm-hmm.
and just like within like Oho the Oho area, and just like approaching that space with respect and real, and just having that mindset that our ancestors left that for us, and in a way that's just them like letting us know that they're still with us today even though they're not physically here with us.
Right, yeah, and I think it just speaks a lot to our history, kind of like how we weren't, localized into just one area. We kind of expanded across the lands for different reasons, and so I think it's just really, really cool to think about that and how those little trails or those little pieces, are part of who we are as Zuni people. So yeah, I think it's really cool that some of these things do exist, and if you're ever looking for them, you just really have to Google it and the Shui Messenger, and it'll take you to an archive, and it has a pretty good amount of different issues. But yeah, I think that was really the last question I had for art. So I kind of just wanted to, again, share the art journaling prompts. So the first one is, what was your first experience with art? And how was art a part of you or your family's life? So again, this is with the life's course approach. So kind of thinking of art from a first instance of, maybe childhood, and then kind of a current position.
Yeah. As was mentioned, like at the beginning, is like a lot of our family members are all artists. So within my family, my first like experience with art that I immediately thought of was going over to my hotas and seeing her working on her beaded dolls, and my nana working on his jewelry, while my other nana was working on making airplanes out of cans. And I would go back home, and then I would see my mama doing her beadwork and my granny also doing her beadwork while my mom was doing her canvas work. So I feel like at a young age, I was introduced to art with the different types of art they were creating. And my first experience actually creating art, I remember it was my mom giving me and my sisters her leftover plastic canvas and letting us pick out like our yarn colors, and eventually like creating like our bookmarks or like just like decorations that we would hang up on the Christmas trees. And I
Oh.
remember trying to replicate the work that she was doing, such as creating Looney Tune tissue boxes or cute designs. But I did not have the patience to create those designs. So I just gave up and stuck to the simple themes. And later on in life, art became a really huge part of who I am. So during my undergraduate years, I actually learned how to do Pueblo embroidery,
Oh
which is
wow.
something that I'm actually doing today. So that definitely took me a long time to process, specifically with me saying like I'm an artist,
Mhm.
just because I don't know, just dealing with that imposter syndrome and feeling like my designs that I was creating was not up to par to what other embroidery artists were creating at different pueblos. So definitely took a lot of self-reflection for me to get to the point where I'm like, oh, I'm actually an artist because I'm creating these beautiful pieces that are now being worn at feast days at like Zia, Laguna, Isleta, Jemez, Tsuki, and later on in Zuni. So yeah, definitely took me a while to get there, and I don't know, it's just something that I'm so proud of, and continuing on that tradition of being an artist within my family, but also like teaching students at UNM as well. It's where I'm able to express my creativity there by creating our Indigenous Craft Night programming event where I bring in different artists as an opportunity for my students to experience healing on a creative level. And that also translates into the work that I'm doing right now, where I actually entered creating digital art. So now I'm creating motifs with pottery designs that we've used in the past, or even creating like my specific designs, which to this day I'm still shocked it's being seen on like my department's social media marketing. So I don't know, just that process of accepting that I'm an artist and I get to pass down the teachings that I've learned to other students and other individuals who are eager to learn the work that I'm creating, but also connecting them with other artists that they're interested in learning from as well.
Awesome. That's so amazing to hear, and I really wish you the best in like everything you're doing. It sounds like amazing stuff. So I definitely want to see like your art. I don't think I've ever really seen it. So I know I've seen some of your sister's pottery work, and that's really nice. So it's really good to hear. I was like gonna ask, what about the can
Oh my
art?
god.
I was like, I don't think I've heard of that. Is that kind of like the recycled art type?
Yeah, it's
Um,
basically a recycle art type. I remember like seeing my other nana in his room, basically cutting out his beer cans and making it into like actual airplanes, and he would like hang it up in his room. So it's definitely like recycle art.
Nice, cool. And yeah, that was actually like I think like a competition within Zuni like this past few years. And you can like see in people's yards too that they like I think I've seen like cactuses and like road runners and different stuff, and I think that's so cool. I definitely want to like do that too within my own yard and make something new out of recycled materials.
It's so beautiful. Like, I think if we think about the challenges that we experience in our community, but we think about combating them with the strengths in our community, art is one of them. It's like it's a healthy coping mechanism. It's a way of economic development. It's a way of cultural preservation. It's a way of, self-identity, a way of connection. Just, yeah, the list goes on and on. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is. And thank you for bringing this up as a topic of conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I definitely just appreciate you both for being here, taking the time and sharing your thoughts, your perspectives on these topics, healing and art specifically. I really look forward and hope that more of these conversations can happen between other people or even again with you both. I think you all really enlighten me in thinking of healing and art in different ways. Thank you so much.